Welcome back, guys. We are finally ready to start our first organ system. So we are, again, think back to that hierarchy we've been working on. We've gone through our molecules, we've gone through our cells, we've gone through tissues, and now we get to organ systems. So the first one that we're going to work on is the integumentary system. So we're going to be talking about the skin. So the integument has a lot of functions. The first thing that people go is, oh, well, hey, it's like the outside of you, which it is. And it is very protective, okay? But it's protective in multiple ways. So first of all, we have a chemical barrier. The surface of us has an acid mantle. It's slightly acidic, which is going to inhibit microbial growth on the skin. There's a physical barrier in terms of a waterproofing barrier. We're going to talk about how we get that in a second. We don't lose water to our environment. When it's very dry outside, the water is not sucked out of our body into the environment. We're not with homeostasis. We're not going to equilibrium there because we have a waterproof barrier. That also means that we don't take on water from the environment either. And then we have a biological barrier in the form of the immune cells that are present, kind of patrolling underneath the surface, waiting for any possible invaders. Then we've got a thermoregulatory property here. So your skin is one of the major organs that is going to help maintain a stable body temperature at about 37 degrees Celsius. If your body temperature goes up, we are going to dilate all of the blood vessels. We're going to vasodilate the blood vessels in the skin, and that's going to allow heat to escape from your skin. So you're going to end up with more blood in your skin at that point. If you get too cold, we're going to constrict those same blood vessels, and we're going to inactivate all of your sweat glands and make sure that you are not losing heat via your skin. So we've got thermoregulation going on. We've got sensation. So basically your skin is your largest sense organ. It is literally filled with receptors that are sending information into the central nervous system about what's touching your body, the environment that you're in, just a ton of different things. Got some metabolic functions, things like converting vitamin D and things like that are going to happen there. It's a blood reservoir. So at any given point in time, there's about 5% of your blood volume in your skin because it is rather large. And then finally, it is excretory. So along with the respiratory, digestive, and urinary systems, the integumentary system functions to get rid of waste products. So sweat is a waste product. So do some Trivial Pursuit facts here about the skin. You can go, quiz people at dinner tonight. So it's somewhere between like 1 to a little over 2 square meters of surface area on your skin. That's pretty impressive. And it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 7% of your body weight, so 4 to 5 kilograms. If you were to take the skin off of somebody, it would weigh a lot. It is of varying thickness throughout the body. Very, very thin skin on your eyelids. Thicker skin like on your lower back. Okay, so we've got various thicknesses. Now, we do have 2 types of skin that we classify into thin skin and thick skin. That, I know it's maddening, but that actually has nothing to do with the actual measurable thickness of the skin. It has to do with how many layers are in it. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the thickest you're going to find is usually somewhere on your back. So we have 2 layers of the skin. We've got the epidermis here, which is the epithelial layer, and then the dermis down here, which is the connective tissue layer. And from studying tissues, you remember that epithelium is avascular, and the blood supply to epithelium comes from the connective tissue below it. And you can see that blood supply right here. Now the hypodermis is technically not part of the skin. It's this fat layer down here. It's subcutaneous fat. But we do have some shared functionality, so you'll see it in the pictures, but it's technically not part of skin. So we're going to start with the epidermis. Here we are looking at our epithelial layer, and we're looking at keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So right away you go, okay, well, this is protective because stratified squamous epithelium is always going to be protective. There are multiple cell types that we're going to find in here. By far, the vast majority of them are keratinocytes. So all of these kind of pinkish cells all up through here, this is all keratinocytes. Their job is to synthesize keratin, which is a protein. We're also going to have melanocytes down here. So this is a melanocyte. Their job is to synthesize melanin. This is what's going to give us our pigment of our skin that we'll talk about in a little bit. Dendritic cells, this guy right here, these are immune cells that are actually in the epidermis. They've got these little projections, and their job is to, alert the immune system if something's coming through our skin, because our skin is part of our first line of defense. The last type of cell we'll see is a tactile cell. It's sitting down in the lowest possible level, and it's going to interact directly with a nerve ending, essentially, that's in the dermis. Okay. So we've got sensory cells, we've got immune cells, and then we've got keratinocytes, and we've got melanocytes in here. Now we're going to look at the layers of the epidermis. Okay, so we just looked at all the cells, but now we are going to classify them into the layers that they sit in. So the first layer is called the stratum basale. This is the deepest layer. So in epithelium, remember that there is always a basement membrane. So this is this line that you see running through here. And the layer of cells sitting directly on that is going to be the stratum basale. So here's where you find all of your stem cells that are going to continually push one cell up toward the surface. Okay, remember stem cells, they self-renew. That's their big quality that's really important for them. You also find about somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 25% of the cells down here being melanocytes. The stratum spinosum is going to be your next layer. Okay, here you're going to find a whole bunch of desmosomes. You can kind of see them kind of represented by these little lines running through them. Remember that desmosomes are like spot welds. They're going to hold cells together. The reason that your skin doesn't fall apart when you apply pressure to it is because the stratum spinosum is being held together by desmosomes. It's mostly keratinocytes in this layer, but you will also find your immune cells. There's your dendritic cell. The next layer is called the stratum granulosum. So it's here, you can see it in this sort of dark purple layer. And the cells become very filled with granules that contain different proteins that are going to waterproof this layer. So the cells are going to essentially die in this layer. The blood supply is way down here. And so the stratum basale, these cells, lots of diffusion into them with the nutrients. They're going to live. As you go farther up in the stratum spinosum, you're starting to get really far away from the blood supply, so the cells are going to start kind of degrading. And one of the things they do during that process is they begin to synthesize all of these proteins that are going to waterproof. And then by the time you get to the stratum granulosum and they're filled up with their granules, they're going to begin to die, and the granules just begin to lay down all of that protein in a layer that is going to waterproof your skin. So what this means is that your body water does not come up through this layer, and anything you put on the surface of your skin does not penetrate that layer. You are waterproof. So this also kind of, if you want to think about it, everything you put on the surface of your skin, it doesn't go down into it. I mean, there's a huge industry built on telling people that they can dramatically change their skin. You can't. Your skin is based on your DNA, and certainly nothing's going through and interacting with your DNA. And so remember that. You are waterproof. Whatever you're putting on the surface, it's not getting through, okay? Also, something to think about, everything on the surface of us is dead. So pretty much all of the surface of us, our skin, our hair, our nails, is completely dead. That's that's kind of a funny thought when we think about how much thought we put into what we look like, and it's the dead part of us. So, interesting thought there. All right, the stratum lucidum, this light purple layer here, this is what would be found in what we would call thick skin. Now, thick skin is only found in two places: the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. All of the other skin on your body is classified as thin skin. So this has nothing to do with the measurable thickness. It has to do with the presence or absence of the stratum lucidum. Last one is the stratum corneum. This is what you can see. The cells are completely dead. They don't have a nucleus anymore. They've gotten rid of all of their organelles, and this is about 20 to 30 layers of dead keratinocytes. Now, they are consistently flaking off the surface to the tune of about 50,000 cells lost per minute. So it takes somewhere in the neighborhood of about 60 days for a cell to go from the stratum basale to flaking off the surface. So we're in a constant state of mitosis down here, driving this constant need for new cells here. Skin color is going to have to do with the epidermis as well, because we're dealing with melanocytes. And even though we definitely see differences in the pigmentation of human skin, we all have roughly the same number of melanocytes. So then that leads to the question, well, what is the major difference? The darker skin, people with darker skin are going to produce more melanin. So you can see the melanin here in their stratum basale, whereas somebody who has lighter skin, you just don't see that melanin, because even though they produce some of it, it generally degrades really quickly because it's very poor quality. Now, what does melanin do? Melanin is going to function like a little umbrella. Its job is to protect the nucleus from UV radiation. So we know that UV radiation damages skin. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. So the goal of melanin is to diffuse into the cells, and it sits over the top of the nucleus like a little umbrella. It's trying to shield the nucleus from the UV radiation. Anytime you've got damage to the DNA, it triggers the formation of more melanin. So whenever you see your skin darken, that is an indication that your DNA is being damaged, because the response is to make more melanin. So any darkening of your skin is an indication that there is damage there. Other things that are going to feed into pigmentation: hemoglobin, so that's the pigment, it's reddish, pinkish, that is in blood. So the more blood you have closer to the surface and the less melanin you have, the more that pinkness is going to show through. Carotene tends to give skin more of a yellowish pigmentation. Certainly melanin is the primary pigmentation, but you also have a couple others that play into that as well. The dermis is the thicker component and the connective tissue component of the skin. So here is where we find all the stuff that makes skin really work. We've got our blood vessels, the nerve fibers, the hair follicles, we've got gland structures, the lymphatic vessels, like all the stuff that really makes skin work is found down in the dermis. So here's your epidermis, okay, and then this is your dermis here, okay, so in this bluish color. There's two different layers to the dermis. The first is up here, it's called the papillary layer. So it looks like this. It's loose areolar connective tissue, and it's formed into these papilla that are going to increase the surface area between the dermis and the epidermis. So anytime you see this sort of wavy pattern, just like with microvilli, we're increasing surface area. The blood supply to the epidermis is down here in these papilla. The more we have, the better the blood supply. So increases in surface area there. Now, the loose areolar connective tissue is going to allow lots of immune cells to work their way through this tissue. The lower portion is called the reticular layer. And here we find dense, irregular connective tissue. So it's by far the thickest component. And remember that we talked about dense, irregular, basically not having as much strength as dense, regular because the fibers are arranged in all different directions, but you gain the ability to have strength in multiple directions. So you sacrifice the level of strength, but you're going to gain some flexibility to go in multiple directions. So the last thing we'll talk about here are dermal modifications. So some different things that we see. Fingerprints, these are called friction ridges. They have to do with the arrangement of the dermal papilla. They're here to give us grasping, gripping abilities. Cleavage lines have to do with the majority of the collagen fibers running in a certain direction. These become important when you're looking at incisions and things like that. If you go with cleavage lines, they tend to heal better than if you go against them. And then the last one are flexure lines. This is where you have any part that has to bend. You're going to need a little extra skin to be able to bend and then straighten back out. And so whenever you bend, then your skin folds into a very specific pattern. So you're going to see these all over your hands, at your wrist, at your elbow, the back of your knee, the groin area, wherever you consistently kind of bunch your skin up, basically. Your neck has them, and it's just the pattern that your skin folds into.